Yeah.
Abdulrahman, I think Dr. Norman Finkelstein is able to join us. I think. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
No, it's okay. Let's get him on.
Hello,
Dr. Norman.
Finkelstein. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
Great to have you. It's a pleasure.
Okay.
Yeah. So guys, obviously Dr. Norman is a very special guest. Most of you probably do know him. Just going to give a brief intro here. Dr. Norman Finkelstein is an American political scientist and activist. His primary areas of research are the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and he received his PhD from the politics department of the Princeton University in 1988. He's the author of 10 books. I'm not sure if that's updated information, but up to 10 books that have been translated.
I think it's overdated. I don't think I've written 10 books.
This is from your website, though, so I guess they'll have to correct that. But then
yesterday, 11 books. They talk about writing books like it's tea bags. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, well, this is the information on your website, and it says that you've written 10 books translated into 54 editions.
My wonderful web manager, Sana Qasim, she's a Palestinian, lives in Greece. Brilliant woman, a chemist.
Yeah.
She handles the website. I don't know anything about the web. I don't know anything about social media. I've never been on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or any of that other crap. So I don't know what's on my website.
Well, you've been a huge influence in this area, and I'm sure many of us here recognize that anybody who's concerned with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict knows your name and definitely knows of your work. So we're very happy to have you here, and I guess we'll get right into it. I mean, with basically the context of what's happening right now in mind, I guess we wanted to just ask you a few questions to get a bit of insight on the situation. So I want to start with this idea of Israel's right to defend itself with what's going on right now, because that's a common theme we hear these days, as if, so to speak, both sides have blood on their hands, which might generally be true, but it's as if they're on equal grounding, and Israel has a right to defend itself against the terrorists of Palestine. What would you say to that?
Okay, just hold on. I want to just grab a book. Hold it for a moment.
Sure.
While he's doing that, we could play a clip.
Because Dr. Finkelstein actually wrote a book that's related to this very question, which is on Gaza. So you might be grabbing that. Yes.
It's Gaza, an inquest into its martyrdom. I think it's that one.
I've muted him just for a sec. I don't know what's going to go on with that phone call.
I think because Dr. Norman Finkelstein's not on for too long, it's probably best not to play any clips, just in case.
Yeah, let's just have him answer the questions in his own time. Then we can play the clips later, inshallah.
Sure.
But yeah,
but I can't find it. So let's talk about your question. Does Israel have the right to self-defense? In 2003, one of Israel's leading sociologists at the Hebrew University, his name was Baruch Kimmerling. He's since passed away. He wrote a book called Politicide, and he described Gaza in 2003. I want you to keep in mind the year for what I'm going to say to you in a moment. In 2003, he described Gaza as the largest concentration camp ever. That was a senior sociologist at the Hebrew University, an eminent sociologist. Now, Gaza in 2003 was kind of a dreamland as compared to what it has become, because the blockade of Gaza didn't begin in full force until 2006, when Israel imposed the blockade in retaliation for the parliamentary elections which former US President Jimmy Carter called fair and free elections, in which the civilian wing of Hamas won the election. So the people of Gaza were punished for participating in democratic elections and electing the wrong party to power from the point of view of the US and Israel. And then the blockade was imposed on Gaza. The blockade was tightened in 2007 when the United States, Israel, and some Palestinian collaborators attempted a coup against the legally elected government of Hamas, and the coup was preempted, it was foiled. So, for the past 15 years, let's see what Gaza looks like. Two facts begin any discussion of Gaza. 70% of Gaza's population are refugees and descendants of refugees. They were the ones who were expelled from Israel in 1947. Number two, one half or more, a little more than half, of Gaza's 2.1 million people are children. They're under the age of 18. So you have an overwhelmingly refugee population. You have an overwhelmingly child population. Now, because of that illegal, immoral, that criminal blockade of Gaza, 80% of the people of Gaza are on humanitarian aid relief, because Israel doesn't let anything in or anything out above the bare minimum to survive. 96% of the water in Gaza, according to the World Health Organization, is unfit for human consumption. Every few years, Israel launches another murderous massacre of Gaza. In 2007 to 8, it was Operation Cast Lead. In 2012, it was Operation Pillar of Defense. In 2014, it was Operation Protective Edge. Gaza. You know what Gaza is? It's the length of a marathon. It's a little less than a marathon. A marathon in our measurements, it's 26.2 miles. Gaza is 25 miles in length. In width, I use the example from my own hometown. It's about a little more than twice the size of Central Park. That's Gaza. That's Gaza. The length of a marathon, the width, about twice the length of Central Park. That's Gaza. That tiny sliver of land that these heartless, murderous hordes, these Mongol hordes, have been suffocating since 2006, leaving aside all the atrocities it committed in Gaza before 2006. That's a whole other story. Just to take one of the massacres it committed during the Israeli, British, French invasion of Egypt in 1956. Pick up this comic book, a very sophisticated comic book by Joe Sacco, S-A-C-C-O, to read about the stories of the massacres in Gaza in 1956. They lined up several hundred Palestinians in Gaza and shot them dead. That's right. They lined them up and shot them dead. That's already ancient history. And then you ask yourself a simple question. According to Human Rights Watch in its recent report called The Threshold Crossed, it said that Israel's committing, I'm using their language, crimes against humanity in Gaza. Listen to the terminology, crimes against humanity. That's at a higher level than war crimes under international law. As Human Rights Watch says, crimes against humanity are, quote, among the most odious crimes, ODIOUS, among the most odious crimes in international law. So now you ask yourself a simple question. It is so simple that maybe even some people in university professorships could understand it. It's that simple. Ask yourself the question, do concentration camp guards have the right to self-defense? Do concentration camp guards have the right to self-defense?
Dr. Norman, if I could just
Brew Kimmerling called Gaza a concentration camp where I say it was like a paradise. That's now. So the question is so stupid. It's beyond words. There are 1 million and more children who are trapped in Gaza. 1 million or more children trapped in Gaza, daily consuming water that is unfit for human consumption. And you're asking me whether the power, the concentration camp guards and their seniors, whether they have the right to self-defense. In the real world, it's such an insane question. I don't even understand how sophisticated, serious human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, how they can use terminology like that. I know some of these people. I respect some of these people. But to me, it's kind of mind-boggling. I assume they're parents. They have children. They know that more than half the population of Gaza is children. How can you possibly believe a state that's trapping 1 million children in a concentration camp can have a right to self-defense? To me, that is so lunatic.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, Dr. Norman, and maybe this
I want to say that to my mother and father.
Yeah. So this follow-up,
crazy.
Yeah. So this follow-up question might even seem more insane or lunatic. So I hope you have the patience to answer it. Someone with Zionist inclinations might push back and say that the history of Hamas precedes that of their rule over Gaza, and that they were basically incorporated or established as a military movement dedicated to the annihilation of any notion of a Jewish state or a Zionist state. So Israel right now would be basically preempting a self-defense so that they don't basically get wiped away, as per the main motive of Hamas in the first place.
When you look at the Nazi defenders, the actual Einsatzgruppen, those were the killing squads of the Nazis. So one of the Einsatzgruppen leaders was asked, how do you justify killing Jewish children? How do you justify killing Jewish children? And he said, well, it's simple. Because after what they did to their parents, when they grow up, they're going to want to kill us. So we're going to kill them first.
Yeah, basically the same answer.
That's the kind of logic you're telling me.
Yes.
That's the kind of logic you're telling me. Because we killed their parents, they're probably going to be very angry, which is probably true. And so when they grow up, they probably want to kill us, which is also probably true. So we should kill them now. Oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me now. Yeah, A, B, C. I have an idea. I have a good idea. Here's my idea. Don't kill their parents. And then you won't have to kill them. How about treating them like human beings first and see how they react? You expelled them from their homes in 1947. According to Human Rights Watch, that was a crime against humanity. In fact, according to Human Rights Watch, if you look at their report, they say all those refugees have a right to return to their home. They still do right now. That's what the law is. That's what the law is. You may not like the law. You may think the law is unfair. Hey, the Native Americans get to go back to New York City. Okay, you can quarrel with Human Rights Watch about that. But the law is they have the right to return. That's the law. So I say, start obeying the law. Start treating them like human beings. Stop carrying on, to use the words of B'Tselem, Israel's leading human rights organization. Stop carrying on like Jewish supremacists. Or to use the expression of Human Rights Watch, stop trying to institute a regime of Jewish domination. Carry on like you're not Übermenschen, supermen. Carry on like Arabs aren't Untermenschen, subhumans. In other words, stop carrying on like Nazis. And then let's see, maybe you can live together. Maybe you can figure it out.
Yeah, and
I would tell them, let's start from the beginning. Stop committing crimes against humanity. And if you've committed them, try to rectify them. And if it's hard to rectify them, then sit down with them and see where you can get. Figure it out. I've been to Gaza. I've been to the occupied territories. I know Palestinians. Perfectly reasonable people. Of course, there are crazy people among them. There are crazy people in every population. But in general, perfectly reasonable people. You can talk to them. If they have leaders who are unreasonable, the population will react by rejecting their leadership. That's what populations really usually do.
Yeah,
and so long as they have the democratic power to express their opinion, as they did in 2006, as I said, I think most Palestinians are reasonable. My impression. Reasonable people, you could probably reach a reasonable settlement of the conflict and move on. But don't carry on like you have the right to torture these people, to torment these people, and then react in shock when they fire a bunch of fireworks at your country. If you look at right now, last night and this morning, I was curious, based on my own research and writing on the past Israeli massacres. I started to go carefully through the web. I never use the web. I hate the web. I hate the web. But I started to look through the web. What actual damage have these rockets done to Israel this time? You hear all these horror stories. 2,300 rockets fired so far. 2,300 rockets fired so far. You would expect massive, huge destruction and death in Gaza. In Israel. And then you look at it.
So I have the statistics here as well.
Practically nothing.
And with this extreme disproportional, like the disproportional numbers that we have on the screen.
Wait. There's a little confusion here. Or go back to our look. You can always make the argument that there are far many Palestinian deaths than Israeli deaths because Israelis have bomb shelters. And they do have a very effective homeland shelter system. It's a complicated one with cell phones, the whole thing. So you can make the argument. So that can explain the disparity in deaths, but that can't explain the disparity in infrastructural damage, because homes, hospitals, government offices, they don't go into shelters. So the interesting statistic is, they say that Hamas has fired 2,300 lethal rockets at Israel. And what is a country supposed to do? And don't we have the right to self-defense? Well, I'm sorry, concentration camp guards don't have the right to self-defense, but let's leave that aside. Let's look at the actual record. What kind of barrage are you facing? And then you start looking. I looked up May 12th, which is when the Hamas projectiles began, May 13th, May 14th, May 15th, May 16th. There was practically nothing. Practically nothing. So people say, oh, what about they had to close down the airport? Well, guess what? They also closed down the airport in 2014. It was for one day. And there was nothing in 2014. There was no damage. Look at the statistics. Look at the numbers. I looked at the numbers. I looked very carefully at them. In 2014, during Operation Protective Edge, they destroyed 18,000 Palestinian homes. 18,000, these Mongol hordes. They destroyed 18,000 Palestinian homes. Remember, these are the homes of people who are already evicted from their homeland. And now their homes are being destroyed. They destroyed, you know how many Israeli homes were destroyed? You remember in 2014, the Hamas rockets. Go look at the numbers. Brace yourself. One Israeli home was destroyed. And my guess is Hamas fired its bottle rockets, and it probably hit the boiler room of a home. These aren't rockets.
Yeah, Dr. Norman, with these, like, I hate to cut you off. I just want to get as many questions as I can in. With these disproportionate numbers we're seeing, and with the disproportionate artillery that each side has in hand, clearly it's uncomparable. When it's so obvious like this, why do you think that the Western governments give their utmost support to Israel? And I saw yesterday that the U.S. representative, what was his name, Ned Price, U.S. State Department spokesman, when he said that Israel has a right to defend himself, the journalist kind of pushed back and told him, well, do Palestinians? And he's sort of stumbled and stuttered on the words and couldn't really answer and give a straightforward answer that they do. Why is it that Western governments are explicitly in support of Israel despite the clear inhumane acts that Israel commits?
Look, that question has so many dimensions to it. The answer to it is it's not that it's complicated, because there's nothing in politics that's intrinsically complicated. It's that it's multidimensional. If you want to look for a single answer, it's very rare. It's almost in any political situation. It's like when you look at yourself, when you do some noble deed, is it pure? Or do you have other self-interested motives, some vanity motives? So even when we attempt to be as pure as we can as human beings, it's very hard, because there's always an alloy of motives. And then when you get to politics, it's very hard to sort it out. I would say in the current situation, President Biden, he has a long history of support for Israel. His administration support, it's old-timers, even new old-timers, all people who've already gone through the bureaucracy. And it's kind of a reflex. They don't even think about it. You support Israel, they don't even remember why, but they know you're supposed to support Israel. So part of it is a reflex. Part of it is the US government, all the governments in the Middle East, aside at this moment from Iran, they're all worried about popular uprisings among their own people. So you can be sure that Netanyahu is telling Sisi in Egypt, if Hamas wins, you know what kind of impact it's going to have among the Egyptian Brotherhood, the Muslim Brotherhood, who Sisi overthrew in the coup, the army coup. You know it's going to energize them, so you too want to suppress them. And Israel is saying the same thing to Jordan. You don't want to energize those Palestinians living in Jordan, do you? You don't want to give them hope. And so all the leaders have a common interest in suppressing this popular resistance in Gaza. So that's a kind of what you might call a generic response. There is a kind of instinctive response by US administrations. And then there's the generic response by all of these governments in power who are terrified at this popular resistance to brutal regimes. And now the popular resistance in Gaza has spread to inside Israel, less so the West Bank. Well, what do you think this message sends to Sisi? His people are not exactly thrilled with his leadership. What do you think the lesson it sends to Jordan, the Jordanian leadership, Abdullah? So they all are terrified of popular resistance, especially as they watch it spread. It starts in Gaza, then in a blink of an eye, it's now in Lud, it's in Haifa, it's in Jaffa. So they're terrified, all of them, of that prospect. And then, of course, there's the view that Iran and Hezbollah are party to the resistance in Gaza. So, of course, the Saudis, who see the whole region as the Iranian axis versus them, they're terrified of what's going on in Gaza, because it seems, in their view, it's another victory for Iran. You know, it's Yemen, it's Syria, and now it's Gaza. So they're terrified. They're also terrified. I'll tell you why they're also terrified. Because the Saudi parasites, they look for foreign governments to pull their chestnuts out of the fire. They can't fight. Saudis can't do anything. Saudis can just barely get out of the bed in the morning. And now they see this sliver of land that's been hermetically sealed for 15 years. It's actually humbling the regional superpower, their superpower, Saudi superpower. The Saudis are hoping that, you know, the Israelis with the Americans would bail them out in conflict with Iran. And now Israel is having a hard time with Gaza, you know. So there are so many factors at play, and it would take probably hours to sort them out. And then once you sort them out, you then have to balance them. It's a complicated picture, but I'll tell you.
Yeah, I understand.
I have no love for Biden, for sure. I have no love for Biden. I mean, you can't hate the guy because he's a corpse. So I can't say I hate him, but I have no love for him. If I loved him, I'd have to be a necrophiliac, which I'm not. So I don't hate him. I don't love him. But I kind of disagree with people who are criticizing him now, because I kind of think Biden is quietly telling Netanyahu, you can't take this further. We're now in, I guess it's a week now of the Israeli murderous assaults in Gaza, and it's about 200 people dead. And for every loss of life, you know, it's there, but the grace of God go I. It could be me. So we don't want to trivialize any loss of life.
However, I was wondering, Dr.
However, just from perspective, on day one of Operation Cast Lead in 2008, day one, the first 5 minutes, Israel bombed a graduation ceremony in Gaza. It was police officers, not army, just traffic cops. It bombed a graduation ceremony. In the first 5 minutes, it killed between 200 and 300 people, young people at the graduation ceremony. So compared to that, and not wanting to in any way diminish the intensity of the bombing, yeah, it's huge. It's shaking the earth, tremors. It's actually rather mild compared to what Israel has done in the past. Now, I don't know where it's going to go, but so far, I think personally, no proof, total speculation. Always have to say, when you have facts and when you have speculation, total speculation. I think Biden is the reason for that. I think Biden is saying, look, I have 14 members of the Security Council who want to pass a ceasefire resolution. I'm holding them off. I'm doing you a favor. I'm holding them off. I'm getting messages from our ambassadors in Iraq, where there was a demonstration yesterday. I've never seen a demonstration like that. It looked like the whole country was out. And there are protests in Jordan. There are protests in Lebanon. And Biden says, and now I have all these young Congress people who are attacking me. So Biden is saying, look, I'll support you, but no major massacres. No major massacres, because if you carry out a major massacre, and don't tell me it's an accident. I know you can carry out a massacre or not carry out a massacre. You have the capability. So don't give me the BS about accidents and misfires and malfunctions. You don't carry out any massacre, or you lose me, or I'm out. I'm out. And that's why I think it's, for Israel, those Mongol hordes, it's relatively, compared to the past, it's been controlled. And there's been 2 high rises demolished. I think the second will be the last, because AP, you don't attack AP, you don't attack Associated Press. Not smart move, Israel. Not smart move. And AP is now, passing on its discontent to the State Department. And I think, my guess is, pure speculation, Biden communicated to them, listen, guys, you don't attack AP. That's my country. You don't attack AP. So I would say probably behind the scenes, especially because Biden wants to be a FDR. He wants to be what they call a transformative president. He doesn't want to get bogged down, sucked in to this Israeli lunacy. He doesn't want to, especially because he doesn't like Netanyahu. He remembers how Netanyahu carried on during the Obama administration when he was the vice president. When this obnoxious Jewish supremacist, racist head of state barged into our Congress and lectures the US government, of which he was the vice president, on what they should know about Iran. Like, we spend tens of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars on our military, on our intelligence, but we need the Jewish supremacist geniuses, the Ubermenschen, the supermen, to come to our Congress and tell us what we don't know. I don't think Biden liked that. And it's still that same Jewish supremacist, obnoxious Ubermenschen who's the head of state there. So Biden's heart is not into it. His hope for a legacy is not into it. He doesn't want to be distracted and diverted from his aspiration to be a transformative president by this obnoxious, racist, supremacist state. So I don't think his heart is even into it. He does what he has to do. It's default. Default in this is we support Israel. But behind the scenes, I kind of think it's probably not true.
Just very quickly, Dr. Norman, if we could link all this to what's happening in Sheikh Jarrah, because that's where all of this conflict is sourced, and we know this started with a litigation about property ownership and whatnot, and there's a historical background to it, and it's complex as well. But if very briefly you could tell us how you see the situation as it relates to Sheikh Jarrah.
It's not complex. I'm not going to get into the legal technicalities because I don't know them and I don't feel I need to know them, frankly. First of all, before we continue, we have to do a time check. What time is it?
By your time,
it's
it would
1:07 p.m.
Yeah.
I can only go on for 5 more minutes because I have to do another interview. If you don't
This will be the last question, then, I guess.
Yeah. So I hate saying things like that. I've got to do another interview like I'm Michael Jackson.
we respect the fact that you have many things going on these days, of course.
Not that I would want to be Michael Jackson, dead or alive, but we'll end on this note. What happened in Sheikh Jarrah, you don't need the legal technicalities. It's just the same thing that happens literally, no poetry, no hyperbole, no exaggeration. It happens every minute of every day in that area. Israel had two goals on its creation, two objectives at its creation in 1948, even before 48, but we'll start from the creation of the state. And you find this in the Human Rights Watch report, the threshold crossed. It starts in 1948, 47, 48. It says, Israel wants to create a state with a Jewish majority. And the way it creates a state with a Jewish majority is as follows. Number one, it forcibly evicts a large portion of the population. It forcibly evicts them, and they became the Palestinian refugees. That was the first step in creating the Jewish majority. And then they engage in this massive land confiscation, which they saw as part of a critical part, not just a part, a critical part of creating a Jewish state. So for them, a Jewish state meant an overwhelming Jewish majority demographically and control over all the land in their state. And so they begin by passing laws which dispossess all those Palestinians who were forced into exile, dispossess them of their land. And then step two was dispossessing the Palestinians who remained of their land. So what we now call the Palestinian Israelis, they were dispossessed of about 2 million dunams of land. The estimate is between 40 and 60% of the land of the Palestinians who remained in Israel was stolen. I don't know why I'm using the word dispossessed. Why do I need a polysyllabic word when I can just use a 2-syllable word? Stolen, or use a 1-syllable word, or robbed by the Israeli state. And this process of dispossession, it never stopped. It didn't stop for a day, really, literally. They're constantly coming up with new plans and new plans to confine the Palestinians in a smaller and smaller and smaller area. I'm talking about inside Israel itself, in a smaller and smaller area. So Palestinians now comprise 19% of the Israeli population. And they're confined overwhelmingly to 3% of the land of Israel. I'm talking about the state of Israel. I'm not talking about the occupied Palestinian territory. About 3% of the land. And then, when they acquired in the June 1967 war the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, they began the same process. They want, as they put it, the famous line of Levi Eshkol, who was the prime minister at the time in 67, he said, "We want the dowry, we don't want the bride. We want the land, we don't want the people." And so the same process begins of dispossessing them of their land. In the case of the West Bank, the state of Israel has taken control now of 30% of the land. 1/3 is Israeli. And it's used only for Jews. It's only for Jews. And in Jerusalem, Jerusalem is a kind of microcosm of the whole picture. Because in East Jerusalem, they have a special commitment to maintaining the Jewish majority. And part of maintaining the Jewish majority is confining Palestinians to less and less land in Jerusalem and giving over more and more to Jewish settlers to create, maintain, preserve, and enhance that Jewish majority. And so Sheikh Jarrah, it was a kind of a fluke. It was a complete fluke because they do that every day. You read the reports, you listen to the news. They've been doing that to the Bedouins in the Negev for the past few years. And every day you hear a new horror story in the Negev of what they're doing with the Bedouins there, trying to confine them in a smaller and smaller piece of land so it can be given over to Jews in their Jewish state. What happened in Sheikh Jarrah was a kind of fluke. Number one, it was mostly middle-class families who had good connections. Number two, because of the good connections and the good organizing, there was a large number of demonstrations. Number three, the Israeli Jewish supremacists, of course, came in and tried to break up the demonstrations in support of Sheikh Jarrah. Then, that's routine. That's par for the course. Nobody blinks an eye. And then it spilled over to Al-Aqsa Mosque. And there was some solidarity expressed by the worshippers in Al-Aqsa Mosque. Then they came under assault. Then it happened to have been on Ramadan. Then the attacks happened to have occurred on the holiest day of Ramadan. So it was this whole concatenation, which was totally unpredictable, as politics 99 out of 100 times is. But it began with the most routine, commonplace event that's literally happened every single day, literally every single day for the past 73 years since Israel was founded. This juggernaut, this maw that gobbles up, consumes the Palestinian land, this protracted land robbery. Perfectly honest with you, it's the first 150 years of America. That's what our country was like. If you read the story, just to give you an example, you read the story of the Cherokee Indians. The Cherokees start out on the East Coast. They're dispossessed. They move to North Carolina and Alabama. They sign all these treaties. You can keep this land. We'll give you this land. They sign the treaties. Of course, the United States breaks all the treaties. Before you know it, there's what's called the oh gosh, how could I forget? It's the famous Cherokee, something like March of Death, but I can't remember it now. Oh God, this is horrible. And then they're moved to not. Okay, they go from Alabama, North Carolina. I forgot where now, but they ended up in the state of Oklahoma when the ratio of whites to Indians in Oklahoma was 10-1, a nice safe ratio. You know what the Israelis call the Jewish majority. Then they turned Oklahoma into a state. They carved it out as a state. It's basically the history of the Americans. It's the history of a lot of states, unfortunately. So it's the same process, the attempt to extinguish, I don't want to say exterminate, I'll just say extinguish the Palestinians as a people. And this is just, as I said, now it came back to me. Thank you, memory. It's called the Trail of Tears. But now I can't remember what state Oklahoma was carved out from. It'll come to me in 10 years. Yeah, it's the same process. And so for those who have a historical memory and are moved by what was done to the Native Americans, it's now happening to the Palestinians. Well, it's been happening for 73 years. It's been happening. It was just a fluke. I mean, the Israelis are so stupid. These Ubermenschen, these geniuses. Remember the Israelis immediately as COVID began. They said, we have the cure. They don't have the cure. But they immediately, the geniuses, we have the cure. They need a cure for mental illness. That's what our country needs, a cure for mental illness. So, it's the same process. I was about to say, to attack the Palestinians in Al-Aqsa Mosque on the holiest day of Ramadan, that's not brilliant. Not brilliant. But they're so arrogant. They are so arrogant, these people, so obnoxious. The other day, 2 days ago, this guy, Shlomo Ben Quinn, I don't know, he was a correspondent of mine. He's probably around 21, 22. I don't know how old he is. And I correspond with everybody. I don't discriminate. You don't like me? Fine, just be respectful. And he writes me this email talking down to me, carrying on like he's superior to me. I just said, you know what? I said, you Nazi Jewish supremacist sack of shit. Don't talk to me that way. Don't talk to me that way. I said, you get it, you stupid. I'm sick of these people. The arrogance of these people nauseate me. They think they can go into a mosque on the highest holy day, not just a mosque, Al-Aqsa Mosque, on the highest holy day of their religious holiday, and they can carry on as they please, and there'll be no reaction. And then they're shocked. Hamas react. Oh, they're so shocked. Hamas, if you read these Israeli analysts, they were probably calculating this, calculating that. Maybe they were just really sickened by what was happening. Now, I'm not going to deny Hamas calculates. I'm not going to deny that. They're a political party, they calculate. But maybe they were touched by the fact that the Palestinians were being evicted from East Jerusalem, their homes, and 70% of Gaza's population, they are refugees who were evicted from their homes. So maybe there was some resonance there. And we all agree the Hamas leadership is very religious. So maybe they were genuinely indignant, and that's a very euphemistic word, at the attacks on worshipers in Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, which happens to be the Palestinian capital according to international law. on the highest holy day of Ramadan. They can't even comprehend it, these Israelis, because they think the Arabs are subhuman. They do. Untermenschen. Subhumans.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Norman, I just don't want you to miss your interview. So I just want to remind you of the time. We could have you on for hours. Really, we could listen to you nonstop. And the questions,
I wouldn't want to, because eventually I'll forget my name. That's where my memories go.
It's really been great listening to you and learning from you. And we hope we can have you on again and we can talk to you again in the future. We wish you all the best with your interviews and all the best in general, and hope to speak to you again soon. Thank you very much.